Farmer's dirty revenge. Furious farmer covers luxury cars in slurry after tourists ignore no parking signs in Lake District field. A furious farmer took dramatic revenge on dozens of motorists after they allegedly ignored warning signs and illegally parked their luxury vehicles in his parking field during the UK heatwave in the Lake District. Now let's take a deeper look and uncover every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
Imagine returning from, like, a really serene hike in the pristine Lake District. You're feeling totally refreshed from the natural beauty, and then you find your $80,000 gleaming Mercedes completely encased in liquid manure.
Oh, man. Just a total nightmare scenario.
Right. Today we are looking at a report titled Slurry Justice, the Battle for the Lake District Fields. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore exactly what happens when the unstoppable force of mass tourism meets the immovable object of a fed-up local resident.
Yeah, the collision of those two worlds is intense.
It really is. We are using this one highly viral, super foul-smelling incident as our lens to examine a much larger, very messy clash between rural farming life and overcrowded beauty spots.
Okay, let's unpack this because the underlying mechanics of this confrontation are just fascinating.
They are. And the context of this particular flashpoint really requires us to look at the environmental and infrastructural reality of the UK during a bank holiday heatwave.
Which is always a recipe for chaos. Oh, absolutely. So the location is Rydal Water in Cumbria. And historically, this area was carved out by glaciers. It was sustained by agriculture for centuries. The roads are essentially these single-track lanes.
Designed for what? Horses and carts?
Exactly. Horses, carts, and moving livestock. They were definitely not built for handling a mass exodus of thousands of modern, oversized vehicles fleeing the sweltering concrete of the cities.
Which, that sets up an immediate geographical bottleneck. When that many people decide simultaneously that they need fresh air and open space, the destination physically cannot expand to accommodate them.
It just breaks down.
Yeah, the parking lots fill up by like 9 in the morning, the soft shoulders disappear, and suddenly you have a miles-long gridlock. And that brings us to the field at Rydal Water. The tourists who ended up coated in farm waste didn't just drift off the road by accident.
No, not at all. The source report documents a deliberate crossing of boundaries here. The footage of the aftermath clearly shows two specific markers that were placed by the landowner.
Okay, what were the markers?
Well, the first was a sign that read, "Polite notice, do not park in the field."
Polite notice, I love that.
Right, very British. And the second warning stated, "Sheep in field." So this establishes immediate legal and physical parameters. It informs any arriving motorists that, hey, the land is private, it's currently in use for agriculture, and access is strictly prohibited.
I really have to pause on the phrase polite notice because it highlights the baseline of civility that was completely shattered here. And the farmer wasn't just relying on laminated cardboard either.
No, they took actual physical measures.
Right. The report notes that motorists encountered physical barricades. Large rocks had been purposefully placed to block vehicle access to this specific gate. To get those high-end vehicles, the Jaguars, the BMWs, the Mercedes, onto the grass, drivers reportedly had to physically move those rocks out of the way.
And moving those barricades, that shifts this event from a passive parking violation to a deliberate intrusion. We can look at this through the psychological framework of de-individuation.
De-individuation. Okay, break that down for us.
So when individuals become part of a massive, anonymous crowd like thousands of frustrated tourists stuck in gridlock, they often lose their sense of personal responsibility.
Oh, interesting. So the rules just go out the window.
Pretty much. The normal social constraints that would stop someone from dismantling a rock wall on private property simply evaporate. They see one person pull onto the grass, the crowd mentality takes over, and suddenly the physical barricade is just dismantled by the group.
Wow. It's like someone coming to your house, seeing a do not enter sign on your bedroom door, picking the lock anyway, and setting up a picnic right on your bed.
That is a perfect way to put it.
But I do want to push back on the entitlement aspect for just a second. Let's look at it from the driver's seat.
Sure, let's play devil's advocate.
Yeah. If you have been sitting in bumper-to-bumper holiday traffic for 3 hours, the sun is beating down on your windshield, your kids are screaming in the backseat, and literally every designated parking spot within a 5-mile radius is taken, does sheer panic override basic logic? Do you think the drivers viewed moving those rocks not as malicious entitlement, but as a desperate survival tactic just to stop the car?
Well, desperation certainly acts as a catalyst, right? But it doesn't neutralize the impact of the transgression. When a driver justifies moving a physical barricade because of their own immediate discomfort, they are prioritizing their leisure over the local economy.
That makes sense. Their vacation trumps someone else's livelihood.
Exactly. The Lake District infrastructure breaks down under this volume, leaving tourists feeling trapped. However, bridging the gap between feeling trapped in your car and actively dismantling a farmer's wall requires a fundamental disconnect.
A disconnect in how they view the area.
Yeah. It shows a view of the countryside as, like, a theme park built for consumption rather than a functioning agricultural workspace.
And treating an agricultural workspace like a theme park parking lot led to a very biblical consequence. We've studied the audacity of the parking job, so we really have to talk about the retaliation.
The infamous retaliation.
Yes. The farmer didn't call the authorities or write a stern letter to the local paper. The farmer fired up a tractor and dispensed what the source so perfectly calls slurry justice.
Slurry is a very specific agricultural tool. It is a mixture of animal waste, mostly manure and water, that is stored and fermented and then used as a highly potent fertilizer.
And potent is probably an understatement.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It is engineered to stick to the soil and release nutrients slowly, which means it is incredibly viscous and famously eye-wateringly pungent.
Oh, God.
And the farmer used industrial farm machinery to spray this thick, corrosive mixture directly over the dozens of luxury vehicles parked illegally in the field.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the sheer mechanical destruction of that. But it begs a question that I think a lot of people might have when they hear this story. Why get so incredibly angry over a few cars parked on some grass? It's just grass, right?
You'd think so, but no.
Right, like the cars leave at the end of the day and the grass just bounces back.
That is such a common misconception, and understanding the mechanism of agricultural damage is crucial here. The issue is soil compaction.
Okay, compaction.
Yeah. When you drive a 2-ton luxury SUV onto a grazing field, the sheer weight of the vehicle crushes the microscopic air pockets within the topsoil.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Once those air pockets are destroyed, the soil can no longer drain water. It becomes a dense, impermeable hardpan. The root systems of the specific grasses that livestock rely on for winter feed are crushed and completely starved of oxygen.
Wow. So the tourists aren't just squashing a few blades of grass. They are systematically destroying the drainage and the crop yield of that field for entire seasons.
Exactly. It's lasting damage.
That is the ultimate aha moment for me. They aren't just borrowing a parking spot. They're literally bankrupting the farmer's future harvest through soil compaction.
That's the reality of it.
And we have a remarkably detailed account of the immediate aftermath from the source material. A 25-year-old eyewitness named Dylan Wakely was traveling through the area toward Buttermere with his partner, Emma Hudson. The time was right around 3:20 p.m., which is basically prime time on a scorching bank holiday.
Dylan's perspective provides this amazing real-time window into the chaos of the scene. He specifically documented a black Mercedes that was completely drenched in the slurry.
Just caked in it.
Yeah. And he observed the owners standing around the vehicle, forced to inspect the messy, foul-smelling reality of their actions. The pristine luxury bubble they arrived in was just completely shattered.
And Dylan's verdict on the situation was uncompromising. Remember, he is a visitor himself. He's caught up in the exact same tourist influx traveling through the Lake District, yet he explicitly called the incident justice.
He broke ranks completely with his fellow motorists.
He really did.
He identified with the systemic struggle of the local residents. Dylan stated he fully understood the farmers' frustration, pointing out that agricultural workers in these regions are in a constant daily battle against irresponsible parking.
So he didn't see it as a prank.
Not at all. He framed the slurry incident not as a malicious prank, but as a harsh, necessary educational tool. He described it as a wake-up call for visitors to utilize common sense and respect rural boundaries. He even suggested that countless other farmers have spent years dreaming of taking this exact same action.
He basically said this farmer lived out the intrusive thoughts of the entire county.
Pretty much.
And the immediate practical fallout is almost comical. Dylan claimed that later that very same day there were massive, sprawling queues outside a local car wash in nearby Ambleside.
Oh, I can only imagine.
There's a huge line of desperate drivers, panicking, trying to scrub baked-on, fermented agricultural manure off their vehicles before the stench permanently fused with their leather interiors.
What's fascinating here is the public reaction once Dylan's footage entered the digital space.
Oh, the internet must have had a field day with this.
Absolutely. The incident went viral. and the broader internet mirrored Dylan's sentiment, overwhelmingly backing the farmer. The debate was highly visible, and the general consensus was that violating clear boundaries forfeits your right to complain about the consequences.
Play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Exactly. One commenter captured the prevailing mood perfectly, writing, "Never mess with a farmer and never park in their fields." Others simply relished the situation, joking about the sudden historic boom in business for that Ambleside car wash.
It is a totally visceral story that clearly strikes a massive chord. But I have to admit, I am still slightly confused about the logistics of the escalation.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, why did the farmer have to resort to vigilante manure drops in the first place? Why couldn't they or the local council simply call a fleet of tow trucks to remove the trespassing vehicles legally?
Well, the logistics of rural towing make that nearly impossible. First, you have the geographic constraint we mentioned earlier. A heavy-duty flatbed tow truck cannot physically navigate down a single-track country lane that is already gridlocked with thousands of holidaymakers.
Oh, right. The tow truck would just get stuck in the same traffic.
Exactly. Second, there is the legal jurisdiction. In the UK, parking on private land without permission is generally a civil trespass issue, not a criminal one.
Wait, really? So the police can't just move them?
Usually no. The police don't have automatic authority to simply tow cars away from private farmland unless an escalating crime is actively occurring. The landowner would have to engage civil enforcement, which takes hours, sometimes days. The farmer needed the cars gone immediately to protect their livelihood.
Which introduces the broader conflict perfectly. We are looking at a textbook example of the tragedy of the commons.
Yes, exactly.
You have this incredibly beautiful shared natural resource, the Lake District. But because individuals are acting purely in their own short-term self-interest, abandoning their cars wherever they want to go for a hike, they end up collectively depleting and destroying the very resource they came to enjoy.
The tragedy of the commons is the exact framework at play here. The source material highlights that this is a heavily documented systemic issue. Residents are living in a constant state of friction.
It's just a daily grind for them.
It is. They deal with blocked roads, physical damage to the land, and severe disruptions to their daily farming activities. The conflict routinely escalates to the point where official interventions are actually required. Cumbria police had to issue public statements specifically addressing this behavior, reminding drivers to obey the highway code.
Having to issue a public statement reminding fully licensed adult drivers to follow the most basic rules of the road they learned when they were teenagers is wild.
It really speaks to the level of breakdown occurring. The police stress the absolute necessity of parking only in designated locations. Crucially, they had to remind tourists not to block emergency access routes.
Oh, because of ambulances and fire trucks.
Exactly. When a narrow rural lane is choked with illegally parked cars, a fire engine or an ambulance simply cannot get through to an emergency. The structural breakdown of the area literally puts lives at risk.
We have this massive contradiction laying bare the reality of modern over-tourism. Britain's popular countryside destinations operate on a knife's edge.
They really do.
The local economies, the pubs, the bed and breakfasts, the local shops, they heavily rely on the revenue that visitors bring in. They need the tourists. But those exact same visitors are completely overwhelming the infrastructure and actively destroying the rural lifestyle they traveled to experience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source describes this specific manure incident as a flashpoint in the ongoing battle between rural communities and overcrowded tourism.
A flashpoint is the perfect word.
Yeah, the farmers feel entirely abandoned by a logistical and legal system that simply cannot manage the influx of the masses. A polite sign is ignored. Heavy rocks are physically moved. Civil trespass laws offer no immediate relief.
They're backed into a corner.
Completely. The agricultural community feels forced into dramatic, undeniable action because it is the only language that effectively communicates the severity of the threat to their livelihood.
It is an extreme measure born entirely of an extreme situation. And it demands that we reevaluate how we interact with the spaces we visit. So to you, listening to this deep dive right now, think about your own habits.
It's an important reflection.
When you travel to a beautiful rural destination to escape the noise and the concrete of your daily life, how do your actions impact the people whose survival is tied to that land? When we cross the city limits into the countryside, are we acting as respectful guests, or are we behaving like invaders claiming territory?
Tourism frequently operates under the dangerous illusion that the destination is merely a static backdrop designed for our personal leisure. We completely forget that it is a dynamic, living ecosystem with its own economic engines, its own ecological vulnerabilities, and its own hard boundaries.
So what does this all mean? If we distill the events at Rydal Water down to their core, the takeaway is pretty clear. When you combine a fundamental lack of respect for local boundaries with the overwhelming crushing pressure of mass tourism, the system breaks.
It shatters.
And when the system breaks, it will inevitably lead to incredibly messy consequences. In this particular case, on a scorching bank holiday, those consequences just happen to be unforgettably smelly.
It was a very loud, very foul-smelling alarm bell warning us about an infrastructure operating far beyond its capacity.
It truly was. And it leaves us with a fascinating, somewhat unsettling thought that I want you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We witnessed the rapid escalation here. Laminated signs were ignored. Physical barricades were dismantled. So the local resident escalated to literal slurry justice.
The nuclear option.
Right. If destructive retaliation is the only thing that forces tourists to finally pay attention to a no parking sign, how will rural communities adapt moving forward?
That is the big question.
If the crowds keep growing, will our most idyllic countryside destinations eventually be forced to resort to aggressive, hostile architecture to protect their land? We might be rapidly heading toward a future where our most welcoming natural escapes are forced to transform into unwelcoming, heavily fortified fortresses, all because we couldn't figure out how to be good guests.
Okay, one question for you. Do you think the farmer was justified in spraying slurry on the luxury cars after drivers ignored multiple warning signs and parked illegally on private farmland in the Lake District? Why or why not? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.